Hi and welcome to episode 4 of my Figura tutorial series. In this episode, I'm going to be explaining the basics of scripting in Figura. Now, as you can imagine, since scripting is literally programming, it's a pretty big topic, and it's going to take literally the rest of this tutorial series. Anyway, even with that, I'm going to be doing my very best to keep it as simple as I can, just so you can get your foot in the door. Hopefully by the end of this episode, you should have all the tools you need to be able to script in Figura. One big thing that's worth noting though, Figura uses Lua for scripting, which is a pre-existing scripting language. So because of that, I won't be going super in depth on Lua scripting itself. I'll give you the basics and enough to get you going, but I won't be going super in depth. You can find other resources, which I will link. So let's clear our avatar and make a new blank one. Alright, here we go. First thing, of course, I want to make a brand new script file. Same as the last episode. Okay, so script files are literally just text files. Just like how avatar.json is just a text file. So if you wanted, you could do scripting in Notepad or Microsoft Word if you were crazy. But I would not recommend that. There's a lot of external programs you can download that'll make scripting so much easier. The main three programs that come to my mind personally would be Visual Studio Code, Notepad++, and Sublime. But you can use whatever text editor you want at the end of the day. Like I said, you could use Microsoft Word if you're insane. Since it's what I use, I'm personally going to be using Visual Studio Code for this tutorial, especially since it has the Lua libraries, which can help a bit. Once the program of your choice is installed, just open up your Lua file. And here we go. Okay. For Visual Studio Code in particular, I definitely recommend you download the Lua libraries. If you just click on this extensions button here and then search Lua, L-U-A, and you just install the first one, you should have the Lua language library. This will help editing in Lua be a lot easier for you. Alright, I'm just going to pop this over to the side. Now we're ready to code. Make sure you're using the local version of your avatar so you can update it correctly. If you're using the cached version from the cloud, it won't update. So the first thing I want to do is just log some text to the chat. To do that, all I have to do is type log and then open brackets like this. And then you need to do quotation marks. You can either do double or single quotation mark. It's up to you. I'm just going to do double. So then inside this, just type your text. I'm going to type hello world exclamation mark. Then if I save this with Control S, you can see it runs once in the chat. Every time I save this, it'll run again. One thing worth noting, you don't have to type log here. You can also type print if you would prefer. And that works as well. I'm going to use log though, since it's shorter. And I prefer using it. Okay, so of course you can do a lot more than just logging text to the chat. You can also log numbers. So if I type 9 here and save this, it comes up with a 9 in blue because rather than being a string, it's a number now. You can also do maths with numbers, like if I type 9 plus 10, it comes up with the result of 19. You can do other math symbols like times, divide, all that kind of stuff. Now apart from strings and numbers, there's also booleans, which is just true or false. You literally just type true, and it comes up as true, or false, and it comes up as false. Now booleans can actually return from the math things we were showing before. For example, if I said 9 is greater than 10, it would tell me false. And if I said 10 was greater than 9, it would tell me true. You can also check if the values are equal by doing two equal signs. Like this. It tells me that 9 is not equal to 10, but 10 is. Similarly, I could type something like this, which is 9 plus 10 is 21. That is in fact false. It's 19, according to the computer. Some would disagree. Now, you may have noticed I used two equal signs here. If I just typed a 1, it gets mad at me and explodes. That's because equals is actually used by something else. Variables, which I'll explain now. Now, you can name variables whatever you want, as long as it's not got spaces and other weird stuff in it. But in this case, I'm just going to call it variable. Variable. And I say that equals 9. And I save this. And then I go log variable. Save that. You see it returns 9 because variable has been set to 9. Just like before, I can do the same maths I was doing before. Variable plus 10, that's 19. Does variable plus 10 equal 19? Yes. You could even make multiple variables and add them together like this, and it would still work just fine. And of course, you don't just have to set variables as numbers, you can set it as text and booleans as well. Okay, this is cool and all, but currently it's still completely useless. So what can we do with this? Well, time to introduce the if statement. If you type if, and then I'm just going to type true here, then you have your code that it runs end. I'm just going to put log this ran, exclamation mark. So the way the if statement works is it checks if this boolean here is true, and if it does, then it runs. So you can see I have this set to true, and if I save this and run it, you can see it's running. But if I made this false, and then run this, you can see I can press save as many times as you want, and it does absolutely nothing. You can also have else statements. So I could say else log this other thing ran. You can see now if it's false, it runs the other thing, and if it's true, it runs this thing. You can also make the else and else if, which adds some more logic. So I could say else if true, then run the other thing. So now if we make this false, it'll return the other thing, but if we make this also false, it will run nothing. Pretty simple. Now, of course, I can link this up to the same maths thing from earlier, where it returns a boolean. I could type 9 plus 10 equals 19. And you can see it runs the first thing. Since 9 plus 10 is 19, it returns true. Therefore, first one runs. If I make this 21, the other thing runs since this returns false. Alright, so we can also reintroduce variables back into this. I'm going to type variable equals, actually I'm going to call this something different. I'm going to just say value, since, you know, it can be whatever you want. I'm going to say this equals 10. Oh, no, I'll say true. Then in here I could put if value, then I could do that, run this, or I could go if value equals 10, same thing. You can imagine you can slot this around however you want. Like in this case, I'm checking if the value is less than 10. You can also chain else ifs after else ifs after else ifs if you want. And you can only have the final else just at the end. You can see if I put like 4 here, log 3. Okay, I messed that up, that's funny. Another pretty important thing is like actual logic gates. So like and or and that kind of stuff. So if I put like if true and true, then it would run, and it would require both to be true to run. I could put true or false, it would run because this one's true. You can also use brackets in here, so just like maths. So I could have true or false, which will return true, and true. This would return true, or it would return false. If I did this. And of course there's the not as well, so you could go not true, this other thing run. So to put this back in the other example, I could put if not value equals 7. This other thing ran, or this thing ran. Alright, so we have all this basic logic running whenever you save it. It's actually definitely worth noting. This is actually running whenever the avatar is reloaded. So whenever I reload my avatar, it'll run this code just the first time, just immediately when you reload. Of course, you might want to run code more than just the moment the avatar loads. So now we need to check Figura's events. Let's just create a new avatar because there's a good template I want to show you. If we include a script, you can include dummy events, which can be extremely useful. If I open this up, okay, so you can see we've got 3 important events in here. We've got entity init, tick, and render. The first one, entity init, which is entity initialization. This runs when the player entity first loads. It's basically the same thing we were doing here before, except this is just when the avatar first loads. We'll come back to entity init in a bit. Next, we have tick. Let's go over here. To create your tick function, you want to type, of course, function, and then events.tick, and then opening and closing brackets. Press enter a couple times, type and, just like indent in here with tab, and you have your tick function, just like in here. You'll notice any code I put inside of this tick function will run once every 20th of a second. So if I type T, you'll see it just spams the chat with T. To make this easier to visualize, I'll quickly make a clock. I'm making a new variable here. I'll call it clock, just outside of the function. And I'll make it equal to 0. And then inside this function, I'm going to type clock equals clock plus 1. Now if I just log clock, you can see now it's constantly going up once every tick. This is the exact same logic we were doing before, we're just executing it over and over every tick. Now render is pretty similar to tick. It's got some extra stuff, but we won't worry about that for now. Basically, render just, instead of executing once every 20th of a second, it executes once every frame, which is like, here you can see I'm getting 60 frames per second, so it would execute 60 times every second. If I was getting 2 frames per second, it'd go twice. If I was getting 400, it'd go 400 times. So you can imagine the speed's a bit inconsistent. So if I make this render, do the same thing, you can see it's going a lot faster now. If I go to bottom of my frames, it's slower now. Render isn't particularly useful for now, so we'll just stick to tick. Now, similarly to how you can define variables, you can also define custom functions. So if I was to go here and I was to type function and then new function, and then I'm just going to say log, this is my new function. You can see it currently doesn't do anything because this never gets called. However, if inside of my code, I'll just put it inside of the tick function. I go new function. You can see now it's being executed. It is inside of the tick function, seeing this, executing this code. Now, functions aren't just a shorthand for code. You can also send data through them. So I could type inside these brackets, say 27, and then I'll just basically create a new variable inside of these brackets. I'm going to call it number. And then inside of this, I'll log number. This is a local variable, by the way. I wouldn't worry too much about what that is for now. And then I'll just quickly get rid of this clock. You can see now it's logging my number. You can also put in multiple things. So I could type, I'll put in a string as well. I'll say text, and then I'll put in boolean. I'll say true. Number, string, bool. And then I can log number, string, bool. Now it's logging all of these things. Okay, so what if you want to store data though? Well, you can do that with tables. So let's create a new variable. I'm going to call it table. I'm going to set it to be equal to these curly brackets. And then I'm going to log table. You can see it logs this. And if I hover over it, it shows an empty table. You can actually do a different log command called log table. And it will display the table when you log it like this. Now, inside my table, I can just do a list of things like I was doing before. I could just type 1, 2, 3. And you can see it logs everything like this. I can even put tables inside my tables, like 333. And there we go. Inside the log table command, it's also worth noting you can kind of delve deeper inside the tables. So now it goes 2 iterations in, so you can see the first table and the second table. You can store a lot more than just numbers in tables, of course. You can store strings. As I just showed you can store tables, you can store booleans, anything you want. Okay, so as you can imagine, tables are what you want to use to store lots of information because you don't want to make a billion different variables. So yeah, you need to understand how to index a table. Say I have this table here and I want to log the first thing. I want to log 22. Well, I need to, inside the log, I need to specify that I want to log the first thing here. I need to say the key. The key is this thing here in the square brackets. So you can see the key for 22 is 1 because it's the first thing in the table. Yes, Lua indexes tables from 1. Yes, it's cursed. Yes, it's annoying. Anyway, to specify the key for your table, just type square brackets next to your table, type your value, save, and you can see it specifies 22. Similarly, if I typed 2 here, it'd show me string, and if I typed 3, it'd show me that third table there. Now, as you can imagine, this can work the exact same way as we were doing before. If I type more square brackets, I can type 1, it'll tell me true, 2, 2, 3, 3. Now, this can be a bit confusing and complicated because you end up having a whole bunch of numeric keys, and it's annoying. So you can actually specify a string for the key as well. Let's make this a little more organized for us. Okay, I've organized this a bit better. It still works exactly the same. You can specify a table key by simply typing something like number equals, and then it'll be 22. Let me just go back to the normal table. You can see it has number here, and then the rest become 1 and 2. I could then have string equals string, and then table equals table. Same thing applies in here, just put in your names and work your way through. I'm going to say bool equals true, and then 2 and 3. I'm too lazy. You see, that works fine. Now, how would you index this? Well, it'll work the exact same way. You could type like this, square brackets, quotation marks, since it's a string now instead of an integer, and then type number, it'll return 22. There's also a shorthand for this. Instead of typing the square brackets and the quotation marks, you can simply type dot number, and that'll also work just fine. You can do things like dot table, dot bool, and it'll work like this. Anyway, that's tables. I'm nearly done here. I just want to also show for loops pretty quickly, since I think that's very good to know. So for loops can be used to repeat code lots of times. You can type for k equals 1, 10, do log k. You can see when this runs, it will run 1 through 10. This can be pretty good for iterating through numbers in order, and of course you can just run code lots of times if you want. But the real value of for loops is actually for searching through tables. So what k actually is the key of a table. So you can go k, which is key, and then v, which is value. I'll type this out, key, value, in pairs, and then you want your table. I'm just going to put table, do, and then I'll go log value. So yeah, you can see it's gone through, it's run this log function 3 different times. Once where value has returned number, once where it's returned the string, once where it's returned this table here. And just to also make this clear, I'll log the key, and you can see it returns the keys here. If I change this to say R, it would return R. If you don't get for loops at first, I wouldn't stress too much. It can be a bit confusing. Okay, that should be enough for you to be able to do a lot of different things with Lua. But I'm sure you're probably like screaming at the screen, how is any of this useful with Figura? Like, you didn't download Figura to print numbers and strings for the chat. Well, this is where Figura's libraries come in. If you go into game and type /Figura docs and then go into globals here, you'll see a whole bunch of different APIs that you can use. If I just go into world here and go to world API, you can see there's a whole bunch of different functions you can do to get values from in the game. Like if I put in get world time, you see it will tell me some information about it. It's a function that will simply return the world time. So if I were to go world, because that's the world API we're using, and then dot get time, and then I want to log this, of course. You can see whenever I run this, it will tell me the current world time. And yes, if you're wondering, this is basically a table called world, which has a whole bunch of functions inside this. If I did log table, you can see all this. Similarly, I could go into the player API and then I'll go game mode. Create new log, and I'll go player, since it's in the player API. And this is actually a colon, since it's a bit different from just being in a table. And then we'll go get game mode. You can see this is errored. If you actually read this, it'll tell you that it's because we're trying to access the player before the entity is loaded. So yeah, this is an instance where we need to use entity in it. So go in here. Now before you run this, it'll tell me that I'm in creative. And if I switch to survival, run this again, now I'm in survival. So let's finally stop just logging things to the chat. Let's actually make something. I said in the last episode I'd show you how to fix crouching for this avatar, so let's do that. Let's go into the script file for this avatar, go to a new line. So yeah, you can see this is a bit broken. So the first thing we need to know is if the player is crouching. So let's go Figura, docs, globals, player API, and get, if I go down here, in the player API, if I go up here, you can see is crouching. They'll return a boolean if the player is crouching or not. Of course, we don't just want to be executing this when the player first loads, we want to be executing it constantly. I actually want to execute it every frame, so I'm going to go function events.render, and then I'll just quickly log player : is crouching. I need those brackets. And there we go. It's spamming my chat with false. If I crouch, it returns true. Something that's useful, you can comment out lines by doing 2 dashes and then saving. You see this isn't running anymore. You can also do block comments, specifically in Visual Studio Code, doing Shift, Alt, and A when you have some text highlighted, and it'll do multiple lines for you. Okay, so now we know if the player's crouching or not. We want to modify the position of this body. So to do that, we need to use the models API. Let's go back into the docs here. Figura, docs, globals, models, model part. And then down here in set, it's set pos. Here you can set the position of a model part or a group of model parts. In the model part API, you don't tell it models : set pos because that's nothing, that's useless information. You instead need to actually tell it at this beginning your specific model part. Okay, so to specify your model part, you first need to type models, just like this, and then dot. And then inside this, you need to specify what model file you're talking about. Figura can support multiple script and texture files, so you need to make sure you're specifying which model file. My model file is just called model.bbmodel, so I'll just type model. Next, we need to specify the model part. The name of this folder here is just body, so next I would type .body. Make sure your casing is correct since everything here is case sensitive. Alright, so we've reached our model part. You can see actually if I quickly went and logged this, it'll tell me that this is my body model part. That'll work just fine. Next I'm just going to do a colon, and then let me just quickly find this again. As this showed, it is set pos, and it has your brackets here. As you can see here, it's just number X, number Y, and number Z. So I'm just going to go 500 just as like an example. And you can see now it's moved the body 5 over, which is like 5 of the Blockbench pixel units. It's the same as doing this. Now, of course, I want this to run if the player's crouching. So to do that, I just need an if statement. I'll go if player : is crouching, since that'll return true. Then set pos to that, else set pos to 0, since I need to make sure I'm resetting everything. Now you can see if I crouch, it'll move it to the side, and if I release, it'll move it back. You can see if I didn't have this, when I crouched, it would just move it and then it'd be stuck. Okay, I've settled on some values I'm somewhat happy with. It was painful, I won't lie, but it works, okay? Oh god, I don't want to do this anymore. Alright, so that's everything I want to teach you for this episode, but before I go, I definitely want to show you some useful resources that I'm sure will help a lot. If you go into Figura and click on this help button here, there's some useful resources. Big one here is the Lua manual. It'll bring you to this site here, which is basically a book on how to use Lua. You can just control F if you need. Alternatively, the same website has the programming in Lua, like first edition, which is like a book basically, and that's a bit more organized. There's a bunch of different editions as well. This is only 5.0. The other thing we have in here is the online wiki. That'll bring you to this page, which is made by KitKat. This will give you a lot of information on how to use some of the APIs, like the action wheel, how to do complex things in the avatar.json, emissive textures, model parts, pings. Pings is very important. In the Moonlight Discord as well, if you go to the server guide up the top here and go to links and FAQ, scroll down to community resources, you can find some very good resources here. This top one here is Manual's Lure Quick Start Guide. It's basically similar to what I was doing in this video, explaining Lure, if having things in text makes things easier for you. And similar to KitKat's wiki, we also have Slime's wiki, which isn't as fleshed out but is a lot neater. This wiki also isn't just focused on scripting, it tells you like how to use the UI and all sorts of things. Definitely worth looking through. And finally, probably the most important thing here we have is Figs. The in-game documentation is a bit annoying to use and difficult to navigate, but Figs makes that a lot easier. You can look down the side here and see all the globals, so I could say models. You can see I can scroll down here through everything in the models API and it'll give me all the descriptions and everything. If we go to player, same thing. It can take a bit to load. And never ever press this button. This site also isn't the easiest to navigate, but it can be very good once you get used to understanding how to use it. It also has a search feature, very, very useful. And finally, the best resource you can go to is the help chat. In Moonlight, assuming you have the help chat enabled in here, you can go to this channel where you can ask people in the community for help making your avatar and scripting. You can either ask in this general channel, or you can make a thread if you'd rather it be an isolated conversation. Just remember to be respectful to everyone that's helping, since they're volunteering their own time. I also definitely recommend, before you ask a question, just Control F, search through the chat, see if things about it have been asked before. So like, say I wanted to learn about pings, I'll search pings. Here you can see a discussion in the past where they've explained how pings work. And of course you can search through the posts as well. Anyway, that will be it for this episode. I hope this all hasn't been too overwhelming, and I hope I've been able to help at least a bit. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.